What's up, Youthfull family? Gary here, back with yet another thought for the day. So let's make sure we've got our notes. Let's make sure we got our Bible. Let's make sure we got the hat. Let's roll the intro and go. Okay, so the thought for today, the thing that's been rattling around up here that I keep coming back to, is I hear a lot on both sides about this question: does God test us? Does God test you? Is he going to put you in a situation to test you, right? And I feel like there's a lot that people don't understand about that phrase. There's a lot that people misconstrue about God's nature with phrases like that. So I wanted to unpack it for a second and just kind of talk about it. So before we can dive in, before we can really start to figure out what we mean when we say, does God test us, we first have to define our terms, right? Like any good discussion or debate or discourse, you need to have the same definition of terms, so that way when you're communicating, that both parties understand what you're talking about. So let's define some of our terms here, right? When we talk about God, right, I'm going to make the inherent assumption that God is good, right? That's my assumption, that's my premise at the start, that God is a good God that wants good things for us, rather than a potential premise of that God requires service, God requires validation from us, God requires, all these other things, and then if we can justify ourselves to God, then, he's a good God to us. So my premise is God is good. So that's term one, that's definition one. The second definition that I think we need to talk about is, what is a test, right? There are a lot of different tests. There are a lot of different ways you can view a test, right? There's a test you take in school. There's test of character. There's testing or trying situations. So there are a lot of different ways you can interpret the phrase, does God test us? So if you're going with the definition that a test is, let's see, what was the exact definition? A test is an event or a situation designed to reveal the character, mettle, or worthiness of something before it goes into widespread use, which is a rough translation of the actual definition of test. If we go with that as our definition of test, the question is, does God test us? And to that, I would say no. And the reason why I would say no is because in that context, right, in the context of it's to prove our worthiness before it goes into widespread use, I don't believe God does that. So I would ask you instead, what's the difference between a test and a challenge, right? And so to me, right, follow me here, a test is something where if you fail, right, usually a test is non-optional, at least in school, right? The test is something forced upon you, and then a test is something where if you fail, there's a punishment, usually a bad grade, right? Possibly, you say you fail a drug test. That has massive implications for your life. Say, you fail your driver's test, your license gets revoked, right? So with failing a test, there are a lot of negative connotations. But a challenge, what is a challenge? A challenge, is, a challenge to a duel. Yeah, I'm not talking about that kind of challenge. I'm talking about a challenge is usually something that we look at as a situation that is difficult, and that once you overcome a challenge, you will have grown or been strengthened in some way, right? So like if you're a rock climber and it's a challenging rock face in front of you, right? You can choose not to try to climb the wall. You can choose not to climb that rock face, and you don't really lose anything, but you might miss out, because if you climb that rock face, you're more than likely going to become stronger, a better climber, have more confidence, right? You're going to gain from stepping up to the challenge and from conquering that challenge. So going back to our original premise, our premises, really, that God is good. And so because God is good, I don't believe God puts us into tests where failure results in punishment, right? Where failure results in your license getting revoked, where failure results in getting a failing grade. I don't believe a good God does that. What I do believe is that a good God, just like any teacher or any mentor, a good God will give you opportunities, give you challenges where you can choose to step up to the challenge. And if you do, the results are beneficial to you. So, back to our original question. Does God test us? I say no, and I say no because of the connotations of the word test and how it misrepresents the nature of the relationship that we have with God, because my relationship with God is as a friend. And a good friend doesn't test you and then punish you for failing. Good friends will help you grow. And that's what I think God does for us, is God will put you into situations, or will allow you to be in a situation, or will use a situation that he had nothing to do with the creation of, right? Because we're in a world where people have free will, right? So not everything in the world, not every situation in the world is directly controlled and organized by God, right? Because people can choose to do things that aren't in line with God's will, right? So if you're in a situation that doesn't feel like something God would put you in, it's probably because God didn't put you there, right? Probably decisions that other people have made or that you've made have put you into that situation. So what I do believe that God does, though, is like any good teacher or mentor, he'll see the situation you're in, and then he'll give you challenges that are within your capabilities. That if you step up and you accomplish the challenge, if you overcome the challenge, your character, your skills, your abilities will grow. Now, here's the interesting thing. Back to our rock climber. When you start rock climbing, you start out on pretty easy grades, right? Pretty easy things to climb. There are lots of handholds all over the place, and it's not necessarily that long a climb. But as you get better, as you conquer more and more challenges in front of you, the route you take gets harder, right? It keeps continually increasing, sometimes to where it even, it has a negative pitch to it, and you have to take a leap of faith. And I think that's how our lives are also, is that when we start out in our walk with God, we get little challenges. We get those baby steps. We get the incremental things. And as we get stronger, as we accomplish more and more challenges, as we step up to the plate more often, the challenges are going to get harder. Spoiler alert. The challenges will get harder, but the reward that you get from completing a challenge gets greater as well, right? You have a lot more sense of satisfaction and accomplishment by climbing El Capitan than you do by climbing the boulder out back. So, with that being said, to bring us full circle, instead of saying, does God test us? The question really is, does God give us opportunities to grow? Does God treat us like he treats a friend, where you use where they're at in their situation to help improve them? Regardless of whether you put them in that situation or not, a good friend helps you. And that's what God does for us, is regardless of what situation you're in, there are going to be opportunities that God will put in front of you where you can choose to step up, or you can choose to let it pass you by. All right? And there's not going to be a punishment for passing it by. There's just not going to be a reward for passing it by. So if you choose to step up to the challenge, if you step up to the plate, if you dive in and take those leaps of faith, the rewards and the satisfaction that you get from that and the growth that you get from that will continue to build, and those challenges are going to get bigger and they're going to get harder, but they're going to get more rewarding. So think about that. The next time that you're in a situation where you don't necessarily want to be, or it's a situation that feels like you shouldn't be there, stop and think for a moment and look for what challenge, what opportunity is there for you to grow, right? Instead of looking at the past and instead of focusing on the past, focus on where you're going, right? When you're driving your car, you have a rear view mirror, but it's just this tiny little thing. And if you stare at that rear view mirror too long, you're going to get in an accident going forward. You're supposed to glance, take a look where you've been, make sure that you've learned from what's behind you, and then you move forward. And that's how our lives should be too. So when you're in that situation, instead of focusing on every little detail of how you got there and going, why me? Why did I do this? Instead, take a glance in the mirror, see where you're at, and go, you know what, that's not where I'm going. And then focus on going forward. Focus on the next opportunity in front of you that you can grow and take that next step from. So that's the thought for today. Hopefully you find this beneficial. Hopefully you find it challenging, something that helps you grow. If you do, feel free to like, comment, or subscribe. I'd love to talk to anyone. So please, thank you, and we'll talk to you again in the next one.